Hey guys, for this tutorial I'm going to be talking about Nurbs, Nurbs curves, Nurbs shapes, and how we can use those to create interesting objects and models in Maya. So what is a Nurb? A Nurb stands for non-uniform rotational basis splines. So basically they operate in a similar way to vector graphics, such as those in Illustrator and the like, with the difference that it operates as well in 3 dimensions, unlike Illustrator, which works in 2 dimensions. So basically, unlike your mesh polygon modeling, it uses points in space to determine the shape of your curves and objects. So the nice thing about Nurbs is that it offers a very clean way to create organic shapes, or even smooth shapes, basically. Smooth shapes such as car doors, car models, glass, bowls, etc. It's really useful for creating those sort of objects. So let's get started. So first things first, we can actually let's just talk about different ways in which you can create a curve in Maya. So there's a few ways we can create curves. So one is using the EP curve tool. If I double click on this, you'll see that there's a few ways of creating a curve. If you open up your tools box, you'll see that there's a different degrees in which you can create curves. So 1, if you set your curve settings to 1, and I just snap it to the grid, it basically creates hard edge points that you can control directly. They offer no sort of curvature. It's basically a straight line with a hard edge. I can make, if with the same tool, if I double click it again and change it to say 2, and I make the same line, it's basically creating a curve based on the next point. So the first point to the second point is a straight line, and then it tries to overcompensate when I make the third point, if that makes sense. Again, if I do this again with 3 points, notice how it's creating a spline that's more evenly distributed across the first and second point. If I go to my control vertex, you'll see that the way that the points are being distributed is also different. This gives you some basic sort of control, but it's not quite the same as the next one, which is a 3-point Bezier setting. So this one actually gives you some handles to work with. If I go to control vertex, you'll see that it creates these handles, and we can actually manipulate those handles with the move tool and change the way that the curve operates. We can make the curve even sharper or narrower, or wider, sorry, based on the scale of those Beziers. And this is important to know as you start modeling with Nurbs, because as you start creating objects such as glass, bowls, cups, even cars, you want to know how the curve is going to behave, basically. So this is a 5-point, and it's basically just creating more sort of invisible sort of points to play with, and so on and so forth. There's also the CV curve tool, which operates slightly differently depending on the way you create them. So CV curve tool, again, they may not look the same, but look how they operate. They operate in a different way. So CV curve tool, unlike the EP curve tool, it doesn't follow exactly the path. It follows the average location between each point. So again, it depends on what tool you use when it comes to modeling in with Nurbs. So with that in mind, let's try creating something. So I'll use the EP curve tool again. I can even just draw, even if you wanted to, you can actually draw curves as well. And then simplify them, smooth them out, etc. But I'll get into that later. Alright, so let's try creating, say, a wine glass using Nurbs tools. So we'll click on our EP curve tool. I'm gonna choose. I'll choose 3 Bezier. Now I'm gonna grid snap to my front view. So basically, my front view is showing me along the x-axis and pointing up. So you'll see as I create this object, it will create itself as well in the perspective view. I'm just going to make a few points that kind of mimic a wine glass. And notice that because I'm using the Bezier, it's trying to average out the curve basically. So we can fix that after the fact. Now up there, and I'm going to bring it back around to represent the inside of the glass. Alright, so it looks pretty messy at the moment, but we can fix that by right-clicking, similar to using mesh tools. You can also manipulate your Nurbs in a similar fashion, either through the curve point, the control vertex, or the hulls. So usually you just use the control vertex. So I can straighten this out by clicking on my Beziers and bringing them in. I'll do the same for the one up here. So this is just a really rough and ready sort of approach, but you'll see what happens once I finish this, how it will operate. And then I'll scale the bottom ones completely flat. Here we are. I'll bring these ones up to the same level as well. I'll bring that one up a little bit, rotate it. So basically just finessing the curve. So rather than having to model every face to make say a wine glass, you basically only have to sort of create the silhouette of the wine glass, or the circumference even, as you would if you can imagine it. So again, scale those in, bring those in. And you can move them around anywhere as well, once you where you think they should fit, basically. Alright, so we have, if you look in the 3D view, in the perspective view, we just have a flat sort of curve. Now you're probably wondering, how am I going to turn this into a wine glass? Well, it's actually pretty simple. We select our curve, and then we go to the Revolve tool. See this one here? Revolve. It's also available in the Curves tool under surfaces, sorry, and then Revolve. There it is there. Let's go to our options. Now, you can also play with the defaults. You can change the way that it's gonna revolve around our object. Basically, when the Nurbs shape is created, it's going to revolve around the point of origin of your object. So in our case, it's dead center in the middle. So it's actually going to create the object based on the circumference of our path from the center point. Now, if I push apply, look what we have here. Basically a perfect wine glass, or a goblet if you want to, if it looks a little bit thick for you. But yeah, pretty easy stuff when it comes to creating stuff, things like wine glasses, and really useful as well. As you can see, it's created a new surface and kept our Bezier separate. And you can still play with the Bezier to create a wider glass. You can change the way that the circumference of the glass works, because the Revolve surface, if you look at your channel box, is still linked to that Bezier. It's only when you break that link by freezing, deleting the history, so deleting the history here, that it no longer operates with that curve. Alright, so that's how you make stuff like bowls, wine glasses, you know, anything circular basically. Alright, so let's just move that across. So let's just group those. I'm going to move that away from now. So what else can we do? We can actually make all kinds of things. We can actually make tubes, pipes, etc. So for instance, just with a straight line, I'll make a straight curve basically. I'm going to snap it using point snap or grid snapping. I'll make a single line, and then I'll make another circle with the Nurbs circles. So this Nurbs circle, I'm going to create one of those. Now, if we use the the extrude tool, it's going to create basically a pipe based on the circumference of our circle and the length of our curve, our initial curve. So I select this, select extrude. Let's just do that again. Select our curve, then our circle, select extrude, and see how it's created a pretty nifty tube. We can actually do it the other way around. There we are. So select the source of the circumference, then the length, the curve in which you want to have it extrude to, push extrude, and see how it creates basically a perfect sort of pipe. And if we play with the Nurbs scale, it will also change the circumference of that pipe. And the cool thing is, with the Bezier, with that second Bezier, we can go into our control vertices. Sorry, I'm going to turn off. I'm going to make that a bit wider actually, so I can actually select my vertice. I can select my control vertice and move that pipe around. We can change the way that it curves just based on the Bezier of those of our path basically. So if I go to X-ray, you'll see that I'm manipulating the Bezier of that vertex point of the Nurbs curve. Really useful if you want to build stuff like, you know, street lamps, fences, pipes, etc. So you may find that useful when you are modeling your next project. So let's just group that for now and put that aside, because there's a few other things we can do. So the third tool we can use is called the Byrail tool. Now this one's pretty cool because it's great for creating sort of flowy objects like flags, slides, hills, etc. Even like stuff like oil slicks if you want to sort of have a sort of slick sort of look to an object. Alright, so how do we do that? So we basically create three curves. So I'm just going to create one now just by snapping to my grid. Right, I'm going to duplicate that one. I'm going to slide that across. And now I have to create a profile curve basically. So a curve that's linked directly between these two curves. So to do that, let's first turn on our display Nurbs CVs, just so we know where the points end. So this is where our points are. So we need to snap our third curve between these 2 points. To do that, hold down the V key on your keyboard and then just snap it to those 2 points. Now, with the Byrail tool, there's a few ways of going about this because there's a few different Byrail tools, but the most basic one is the Byrail 1 tool. So just click on the Byrail 1 tool, see the options. Basically, you can automatically set up so it works with polygons, but for now, let's just go with Nurbs. I'm going to click on the Byrail 1. I'm going to select my profile, then I'm going to select my first line and then my second line, and it basically creates this cool little sort of piece of fabric, basically, if you want to call it that. And we can still manipulate these points too. So if we click on the control vertices of our object, we can actually create really cool sort of fabric-y, flowy objects, basically. Let's not click on the second piece. Let's click on that one. So let's just hide that for a second. Control vertice, we can actually manipulate the object that was created, basically, by manipulating our original paths. We can even make the path flow a little bit. So if we unhide that, ooh, it's gone crazy. That's probably because of I've taken it too far. So let's unhide. Let's undo that and rehide. Oh. So obviously there's limits to how far we can manipulate our curves, but we can still get some pretty cool stuff. Like so. So see how it's flowing around? Really cool. So that's another thing we can do. So let's just group those together for now. Delete that one. And move it away, move it across. Now, alright. So that's 3 things we can make with Nurbs. And of course you can still make your basic circles and squares and stuff like that. And there's tons of other things we can actually add too. You can do your bevels, you can do intersections, etc., etc. So I'd suggest just play around with these different sort of Nurbs objects and tools to see what you can create. Now, you're probably wondering whether or not you can texture these objects. Well, you can apply materials and you can apply sort of procedural textures, but UV unwrapping these things is pretty difficult. So what you need to do is actually convert these into a polygon mesh from the Nurbs in order to create an object that you can texture. So to do that, let's open up my group, select my Revolve surface, and if I go to modify, let's go down to, we'll go to convert Nurbs to polygons, options, and we can choose how much subdivisions we want, whether we want quads. So I would go with quads, tessellation, count, etc. Now, let's have a look at this. When we push apply, it creates a new object, a Nurbs to poly object. If I move that away, it's basically a meshed version of our polygon, of our Nurbs cup. And I can smooth that out as well. Practically identical. And then you can unwrap this and model it, not model it, use it as a, you can probably rig it to a armature, or give it a texture that's more consistent, etc. And you can do that with all of our objects. So if I click on this object here, the pipe, I can push the same thing and it'll create a polygonal pipe. And again, with even this one here, let's make a polygonal version of that sheet. Now, of course, sometimes the subdivisions ain't perfect, so you have to play with the settings as you see them here. Basically, work out how much subdivision you want, etc., edge length, etc. So there are limitations to it, but you can also clean it up yourself. You can clean it up as you use the tools as well. But that's a quick little overview of using Nurbs tools to create polygonal objects and interesting objects at that. One last little thing: if you find that your mesh is black, it means that your texture normals or your surface normals are inverted. So we can actually invert those using the mesh display and conform, or reverse, just if you want to see it more clearly. Alright, so that's a quick little overview. I'd suggest you experiment with all the tools here with the Nurbs tool set, because they can come in a lot of handy when you start to model more complicated objects like, street lamps, cups, bowls, even cars. Alright, so don't be afraid to try everything in this tool set and experiment as much as you can. Alright, thanks.